Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Filmmakers Life, which is our podcast here at Filmmaker Success, where we talk to filmmakers who are on their professional journey so that we can inspire other filmmakers to follow suit. And what I see is that filmmakers are the most creative, the most hardworking people, but they often find themselves spinning their wheels. And so this podcast is designed to show filmmakers how to move forward no matter what, why, or how long they've been stuck. So today, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Scott Barnett. And we don't do a bio, Scott, because we're going to go from the beginning and work through your resume, as it were, chronologically. And the first question that I always like to ask my guests is, when did you first know you were a filmmaker?
Well, hello everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you, Joanne. And actually, when I got the bug for this, actually was when I was 14 years old. Um, uh, when I was just when my sister actually entered high school, I went to a football game with her, and there were some people on the field, filming the game. And when I saw those guys with the cameras on their shoulder, I remembered very distinctly to this day saying out loud, I want to do that. And that was it. And I was able to get a VHS camera at the time. And I think the first thing I ever filmed were some ducks in a pond. And, started me on my wildlife journey. And I've never looked back. And I will say, fortunately, I had a, back when this is the 80s, when I was doing that, our school, which I'll put out there, South Plantation High with Alice Culpepper, was a great school for video production because not many schools were doing that. Her husband, Lee Culpepper, was very helpful in making that happen. So we were doing actual TV shows back then at the high school, back when that was very, very uncommon. So we were excited about that. So and that's where it all began.
Um, Fantastic. That's really interesting. You said, just sort of in passing, that was how my work in filmmaking and in wildlife began. And I was wondering about that. I was wondering if you started out in wildlife or if the profession just sort of took you there. But from what you're saying, you just answered one of my questions, I think. Is
Yeah.
that really, ducks in a pond, was that really your interest in wildlife?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm a Florida boy, born and raised in Florida. My parents are from Florida, and I'm a product of my environment. Obviously, we have the wonderful Florida Everglades here in South Florida, and it's kind of always present of mind. Um, uh, and especially the environment plays a major role here in Florida. So it's kind of like always been intertwined with a lot of my work. Um, and yeah, I mean, who doesn't love watching, animals in the wild and seeing the various behaviors. So in one way or the other, I was always taking photos, videos. It wasn't my main occupation necessarily, but it's something I've always been, fascinated by. And where I live now, I'm out in the west side of Broward County. There's like a wetlands behind us where we live, unfortunately, and we see beautiful Everglades wading birds every single day. So,
Um,
and I am a Miami Hurricane, and so
uh-huh.
I see so I have ibis in my backyard pretty much every day.
Uh-huh.
So it
Uh-huh.
all kind of works all together.
It's funny, because now that I'm back in Florida, and I was thinking about this as I was watching your films. My ex-husband was a very big outdoorsman, canoe. We used to go canoeing every weekend. My best friend was very outdoorsy, and I've loved that, but I don't quite do it myself, you know.
Right.
the outdoors person that I wish I was, I think. But I've had great friends and inspiration about it. But I think there's something, I don't think people think about this. People who don't know Florida don't understand how extraordinary the nature is here. And when you talk about the wetlands, for example, it's just such an extraordinarily important part of our universe. And I have to say, when I was watching, looking through your films, there's a shot that you have of a Seminole canoeist with the manatees swimming by.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
just was
that was
blown away.
that was someone from above looking down on me, saying to me, "You're doing something right, so I'm going to give you this." Um, so actually, since you mentioned that, so I did a film called Seminole Pathways, which talks about the story of the dugout canoe and its significance over thousands of years of history here in Florida. And I was working with a Seminole named Daniel Tommy and Pedro Cepeda, who are canoe carvers in the tradition of actually, I mean, it's really an incredible thing because they still to this day will cut down a giant cypress tree in the forest and start carving a canoe in the traditional way. You know, and one aside about that, you know, it's very interesting talking about using nature to help your practice. What they actually traditionally done, I don't want to get into this too far, but what they actually traditionally have done is they cut down a tree in the forest, it falls down, it's very heavy, obviously. They start carving the canoe on site, and when they're done with the canoe, they're so ingenious because they start that process in like I want to say it can take a while, but maybe like in the fall, and it takes a long time to chop away at a canoe. But what they wait for is the summer rains to come in Florida, and then once the canoe is totally cut out and carved, they wait for the waters to rise, and then the canoe simply just floats out of the forest. And so they actually use, you know, the seasons, and they understand when to build things based on the seasons. So that was actually very special. And then the shot that you're talking about was actually on one of the parts of the New River in Fort Lauderdale that is still, you know, with its natural, you know, look and what the river used to look like. So for me, it was extremely special to be able to film a Seminole in a real dugout canoe on this traditional part of the New River, which the Seminoles, you know, used for, you know, their as their highway system back and forth. And so then we saw something. I was flying my drone and we saw something in the distance in the water. And at first I thought maybe it was alligators, but then we kind of like, of course, once you see activity like that, you go straight towards it. And when I saw it was manatees, I mean, just to have manatees in that moment at that part of the river, like I said, it was very special to somebody was giving me that as a blessing of a sort. So you know, that was just a wonderful thing. So
That's so funny because I thought it was alligators at first, because that's what I
yeah,
expect to see in the
right,
water. I
right,
did a lot of canoeing. We were always, we used to chase the alligators, which
right, right. Yeah,
I'm not sure that was politically correct, but that's what we did. And but manatees, I've barely ever seen manatees. They're
yeah, yeah.
so hidden and so mysterious. So to see all these manatees in that shot was just so okay. I completely took us off course. So let's go back. So you knew very young, you knew early on. Did you go to film school or
Yeah, so actually in high school, between my junior and senior year of high school, I went to a program up at Northwestern University called the Cherub Program. And it's a high school program for, you know, high school students who want to be in the film and TV industry. And we, you know, would get visits by people in the industry there who would talk about their careers and that sort of thing. You know, one of the highlights was Henry Winkler was there the year I was there, and he saw a short film that I did and said, "What a great film!" So I had the Fonz telling me, you know, that I had a great film. And I kind of took it for granted, the program that I was in. My roommate actually in that program that summer was a guy named Mitch Davis, and who's the son of Clive Davis,
Uh-huh.
the music producer. And
Right.
Clive actually came and talked about, his career and, talking about, Barry Manilow and Whitney Houston and all of the people that he launched those careers. So that was a really wonderful program that I was a part of. And actually, that's where at that program in Chicago or Evanston, Illinois, that's when I kind of in my head made the transition from originally in high school I was doing TV and broadcast, but then that Northwestern program, being exposed to some of the things they were doing, kind of made the transition to I wanted to go into film, and then from there I eventually went to the University of Miami. I did film school at the University of Miami. But it was one of the good things about Miami was they require you to do a dual major, which means you are in the communications program, but you also have to do some form of liberal arts. So I did film and I also did history, which I always appreciated being able to do dual disciplines like that. And the film school, Miami at that time was teaching traditional Hollywood filmmaking, teaching the typical,
Who was the chair when you were in
that was
communication?
Dean Lazarus, Paul
Paul
Lazarus.
Lazarus, yes,
Yes.
yes,
Yeah, he
yes.
was one of the original producers on the original Westworld movie back in the 70s.
Right. I came to Miami, to the University of Miami in 1984,
Oh,
and
okay.
I was in the English department, and then I took all the, I was allowed to take electives. That's right. That's the word.
Right.
Electives. I took all my electives in the film department
Yeah.
with I'm not going to remember his name now. Paul
Paul
Nagel,
Nagel.
writing teacher.
Yeah. Yeah. No, Paul Nagel, I had him for as a script writing professor.
Right,
So,
right. He was wonderful. He
yeah.
was wonderful.
Yeah. I remember the class I was in, the initial script writing class. He didn't hold any punches. He says, I am going to teach you how to write the traditional Hollywood script. Nothing else, nothing more. Three-part story. You need a romantic, involvement. And the reason he was doing that was that's what was working at that time. How the formula for a Hollywood movie. So and that was no, I had a great time when I was at
My,
school.
my favorite Paul Nagel story was that he started out as an actor,
I didn't know
and
that. Yeah.
he was performing in a little tiny theater in Coral Gables during the time of the blacklist, and Tennessee Williams got blacklisted and came and wrote Sweet Bird of Youth
Oh, there you
on the
go.
actors at this little theater in Coral Gables. And he would be sitting in the alley behind the theater on a crate drinking whiskey. And he would ask Paul to come outside and read the lines as he was writing them, they were developing this play.
Oh, that's great.
And he said, and Paul was a Southerner, he was from Miami. And Tennessee Williams would say to him, Paul, can you read these lines so I hear how they sound in your mouth? And that is just one of my favorite stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like here we are in Miami, and especially back then, I came in 84, and there's this sort of idea of, we're in a backwater, there's nothing happening, and it was like, no, Tennessee Williams was here
Oh,
developing.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Actually, I was in the archives in Key West, and they have quite a collection of Tennessee Williams memorabilia from his time in Key West as well. So,
Interesting.
yeah.
So you went to film school at the University of Miami, and then what did you do after film school?
And then I was actually going against the tide while all of my peers were going off to Hollywood to
Right.
become directors by the time they were 22. I actually went a different tact. I was going swimming against the tide, and I had thought there were more opportunities in the Spanish language world. And originally, I thought I was going to be going to Venezuela. At that time, Caracas was the center. What we know as Miami as the center of kind of Latin television now, with all the stations and media groups. At that time, Caracas in Venezuela was the center of television. And my theory was, in terms of the progression, Latin America, I always felt, no offense to anybody, but I always felt Latin America in terms of their programming was about 20 years behind the US. So we had variety shows in the 1960s and 70s, and then Latin America had variety shows in the 80s and 90s. And then we had, soap operas, which were famous in the 60s and 70s. And then Latin America had soap operas. And so then I had thought that, well, by the time I'm starting my career, there's going to be more opportunities for real TV shows and movies happening in Latin America. And I did minor in Spanish, and I was interested in that part of the world. Yeah, the only problem for me is Latin America never really got out of telenovelas and variety shows. They still do the same,
It's
and
so
and a lot of
interesting.
that actually, I mean, along the lines of the world that you're always talking about, a lot of that has to do with financing and funding. It was always hard for Latin America to find that world of finance and funding that you found, for instance, in Southern California, to help propel,
Right.
those kind of things forward. And they've tried over the years, they've tried to do
Still trying, still
still
trying.
trying, they had Charlie's Angels come out, and they've tried, but I mean, we're getting off on so many, we can go so many ways here, but obviously what happened with streaming and companies like Netflix, it kind of opened up the world to um, uh, films from around the world that everybody started
Yeah,
to appreciate. And
yep.
I mean, you actually, since I don't know if you remember, in Coral Gables, there was a store when we were renting videotapes, VHS tapes. I don't know if you remember a store, I think it was called Lion Video. And
Oh,
Lion
yes, yes,
Lion Video specialized in foreign films. It was the only
exactly.
place besides, and I know your background is, I think you used to work with theaters offering art films and foreign films yourself,
Well, I
right?
used to run the Alliance Cinema in
Yeah,
Lincoln.
yeah, okay. And so I think, I mean, I saw films there. And so, in order to see foreign films, you really had to go out of your way. It
Mhm.
was, it's so remarkable now because I remember growing up in the 1980s when I'm dating myself, but I remember when it was a big deal when The Gods Must Be Crazy came out. And a
Oh,
lot
yeah,
and a lot of people, it was in the art film world. And I know that the general public sometimes had problems with it because, films like that, there were subtitles and people didn't want to read subtitles, and trying to get people to watch foreign films was, kind of an arduous task. Um, and it's ironic now because I think a majority of us today, even if it's English, foreign language, we put subtitles on anyway, so we don't miss, the script. I mean, I
so
watch pretty much all my shows with subtitles on just because I want to make sure I see
exactly,
all the words. And
exactly.
but and now, people are watching films from all over the world. I have three daughters, and one of my daughters, all she watches are K-dramas, and
Right, right.
that's a whole world unto itself. And um, so
It's
getting back to
fascinating.
Latin America, um, even Latin America now has some great filmmakers, and that are I mean, worldwide. It's just kind of the Pandora's box of filmmaking is kind of blown open worldwide, and that's where you see so many. I mean, we're getting off topic here, but co-productions and people working internationally. It really is a global business now. It's not just regional,
Absolutely.
territorial. Um, it's
Absolutely.
it's it's partnerships with people. So
So
um,
were you disappointed with your choice to go with Spanish language? Because I would have probably made the same choice. I really thought that was where we were heading.
yeah. No, the one thing is sometimes you have an intentionality about what you want to do, especially when you're young, but the world is going to take you where it's going to take you.
That's right.
And so what happened with me is I got connected with a production company in Miami called Pigeon Productions.
Oh,
I,
yes.
I was freelancing early on as a PA, working with various companies. And a lot of that work was in the U.S. Hispanic market. And then I joined this company, Pigeon Productions, with great mentors, Mercy Palomo, Luis Palomo, brother and sister team. And, I and it was all mainly U.S. Hispanic work because at that time that we're talking the early '90s, the U.S. Hispanic market was like a burgeoning market for TV commercial production.
Uh-huh.
There were maybe at the time there were maybe 6 or 7 directors in the entire country that were doing all that work. And we were doing big campaigns for Sears and Toyota and regular national campaigns, but they just happened to be working with Hispanic agencies like some of the traditional agencies like Siboney, Conil, some of these Zuby, some of these agencies that were specializing in the U.S. Hispanic market. So I
Mm.
rode that wave for a good decade, and then over
Fantastic.
time,
So I just want to say, so it's rare when I have guests on here that they came through the production, through producing commercials.
right?
Uh, you know, and I always am interested, what skills do you think, having 10 years of experience producing commercials, what what do you think the benefits were of that background on your filmmaking?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, first of all, TV commercial production is film production or was
True,
film production.
true.
And in many ways, it what attracted me to TV commercials, believe it or not, was it was the highest form of production, meaning you were
Right.
working with the most expensive
Yes.
equipment, you were working with full crews,
Yes.
you have a crew of 50 people working all day to make a 30-second commercial. So you
Right.
have the time to set the lights however you want. I mean, the setups would take forever. Whereas, in a TV series, you got to clip along and do your shots, move on, do your shots, move on, do your shots, move on.
Mhm.
TV commercials are kind of like the Bentley of
Uh-huh.
production.
Uh-huh.
You roll slowly, you take your time,
Right.
you show everybody who you are. Look at all my magnificent equipment and all the we have time and I will tell you that the egos of directors in the commercial market are much higher than those of the feature market. And I've always said the reason this is because the people who make feature, I'm going to get in trouble here, but the people who make features are actually doing so much work to get a feature done. They don't have time to walk around and say, "Look at me and how wonderful I am." But the commercial directors, they come in and they think they're selling Tide detergent and they're changing the world. Um, so
It's so true. Scott, one of the things that I've witnessed is that I talk about this in my book because I talk about where filmmakers get stuck. And one of the places that filmmakers get stuck is they're working in the commercial world and they cannot transition to making features. And I'm sure there are many reasons. One of the reasons I think is that they can't they're so used to, as you were talking about it, the Bentley of filmmaking, and they're used to these high budgets, and then when they want to make their first film and they don't have access to that kind of money, they just can't make that transition. It's a very tricky transition to
yeah,
make, is what I
yeah,
see.
yeah. I mean, I'll tell you that I was purposeful in going towards TV commercial production over like features and series. And I'll tell you for the simple reason is I wanted to have a normal family life. I wanted to get married. I wanted to have kids. And TV commercials are nice because you're in and out. You work on it for about a month and you're done. You're in and out, in and out. You used to be able to make a decent living at it. And features would require you to be away for months at a time, TV
Mm.
series months at a time. So I was very purposeful that I didn't necessarily want to do long form at that time period because I wanted to kind of have a balanced quality of life. And I wanted to enjoy my time with my kids. And, I haven't missed any soccer games. I haven't missed any ballet recitals. That was always very important for me, and that's not for everyone. Some people just
Right.
are on their own and they want to do features and TV series. But I
And
but
some
going
people
but
have kids and do features and TV series.
yeah, yeah, and it's
It's different.
difficult. Yeah.
Everyone's different,
Yeah, yeah, no, they make it happen. But I will say this, going back to working with a company and being there for 10 years, one thing that I know that you're asking about the transition, but I wanted to make a point that,
Yeah.
especially for young people, it's very easy now that we've been kind of democratized and anybody can go out and get a camera and start filming. It's very easy to just start and feel like, oh, I can go out and be a filmmaker, but it's super, super important that you sponge information from veterans in the industry to understand how it all works, to how a film set works, to understand how to make a film, how to manage a film, how to fundraise for a film. Working for a company for 10 years and seeing the inner workings of how they function as a business, there's ups and downs. There's highs and, it's great times and lots of productions, and there's lows, and, you're on the brink of collapse. And, being able to go through that and see that internally was a huge leg up for me to understand the business of filmmaking. And, one thing that we don't see as much anymore is young people kind of apprenticeships within departments. People just feel like, I have a camera, I'm going to be a filmmaker. But there's protocols, there's disciplines. One of the things I like to say, and this is not boastful, but I like to say I can do any single position on a film set, because I learned all of those positions, starting as a PA and working on everything. I mean, I'm not saying I would be very good at makeup, but I know what the routine is.
I did makeup. I did makeup in
Yeah.
university. I was the
So
drama
so you
makeup
you
person.
you work in all of those positions and you have a better appreciation for what everybody's
Yep.
doing. And so there's a learning process that's necessary. I mean, when I went to the University of Miami, it was 1989,
Mm.
and the summer I started the summer before, and I was really excited because Spike Lee came to town and debuted "Do the Right Thing" in the Cosford Cinema at the University of Miami, and that was very impactful to be able to. And he was very young at the time, and he was just he was controversial, and he was just on the scene, and and that had a big impact on me because I had thought that, oh, I have to be a director by the time I'm 26. If I don't make it by the time I'm 26, then I don't know what I'm going to do. And you set a certain standard for yourself. And I remember, I did little things here and there, and I did direct some small things by the time I was 26. By the time I was 26, then it was like, okay, now what? I set that goal for myself, and it's like, well, wait a second, now you got to keep going. And so, to maintain longevity in this business is very challenging and difficult. And in a lot of film schools, they'll tell you in a class of I don't know, 100 people, one of the things they'll say is, only two of you in this entire class will have a career in filmmaking,
Right.
because it's not for everybody. And whether it's freelance or what have you. So the important thing is, in terms of making that transition, as you say, to another modality, let's say, because it's not just long features, it's so many different things now, is don't try to do it all on your own. You need to develop relationships, you need to collaborate,
Right.
and it's it's very important to develop relationships over time. And some things, most people starting out don't realize is, especially if you're starting out as a production assistant, all those production assistants around you, one day, if they, stick with it, they are going to be producers and directors themselves. They're going to be in finance. They're going to be somewhere in the business. And those relationships are very, very important. So it's important to maintain those relationships throughout your career. And the one thing that I think everybody in the filmmaking world agrees upon is, your reputation is everything. So it's very important to move forward in a way with great integrity. And production managers and producers will tell you the first thing they work with PAs is that level of trust. You learn very quickly you cannot
Very
lie
quickly.
about something. So, and we've all done it as PAs. They say, "Oh, did you return these clothes to this store?" And you say, "Yeah, yeah, sure I did." But then they find out that you didn't, and they find the truth. So, it becomes very important to have those trusting relationships, and those production managers and producers will suss you out real quick, because they need that information, and the honest truth, and because you're all working towards a goal, and
And
so
they will keep hiring those people that they can trust. They will keep
absolutely,
hiring them,
absolutely.
keep
So,
hiring them.
but yeah, but I don't know if you want to keep going
So
on. Yeah,
I wanted
sure.
to ask, was Osceola's Journey the first feature that you made?
Well,
Was that
yeah. Well, let's see. I mean, in terms of documentaries, um, before that documentary, actually, when I was fresh out of school, I made a documentary about like I said, I'm a fan of history. So one of the first documentaries was called Him or She. It was the history of the New River in Fort Lauderdale that I talked about, and it was a simple 30-minute documentary about the history of Fort Lauderdale. And actually, what's very interesting, talking about coming full circle, one of the things I talked about in that film was the early pioneers, the
right,
Stranahan House, and what people
right,
really know of Fort Lauderdale history, and we talked very slightly about the Seminole tribe at that time. Oh, the Seminoles came to trade at the trading post, and then they went back out to the Everglades, and so Seminole Pathways was kind of my answer because that was talking about the other side of the equation. There was a whole
right,
world of the indigenous community living out in the
right.
glades, and in reality, the Stranahan House and the trading post and down in Fort Lauderdale was just a small little, outpost compared to the world that the indigenous people were living in. So it was kind of like two sides to that story.
That's very interesting because I don't know that a lot of people would figure that piece out.
Yeah,
I feel as though, you know, part of my story is for many years I was married to somebody we went canoeing every weekend. We went all over Florida, and I feel as though I know Florida in a way that most people don't. And learning about Florida through the water, through the rivers, through the springs, through the and
yeah.
the history, and I just really appreciate that you tuned into that and started doing that work.
Yeah,
uh,
I think I'll tell you I think one of the inspirations was when Clint Eastwood did two films about Iwo Jima, and he did the first film about the U.S. side, and then he
right.
did the second film from the Japanese perspective. And
Right.
so I'm always, especially kind of, I don't call myself a historian, but I call myself a student of history, and
Mm,
I think perspective is always very interesting in terms of studying a history of a place. So
mm.
that's always been very important.
So was that particular film how you connected with the Seminole tribe?
So
Is
no,
that how
so
that happened?
actually the and then going on to a film I did called Osceola's Journey. So when I was at the University of Miami, there was a professor there named Dr. Patricia Wickman, who is kind of since then has become kind of a mentor for me.
Mm,
She is a historian who is from Florida. She's actually originally from the Menorcan community of St. Augustine, which is one of the oldest communities in Florida,
uh-huh.
and she was teaching. I think I took one of actually I did a Florida history class with her at the University of Miami, and then I thought it was so strange because later on I did another class about Spanish history, and she was a fellow student because I was doing an advanced class as an undergraduate, and she was doing her graduate studies for her doctorate. So it's kind
Uh,
of weird for me, like how can a professor
right.
be a student? But that happens. And we developed a good chemistry. And then she, for many years, worked with the Seminole tribe. She was the director of the Department of Anthropology and Genealogy with the Seminole tribe, and she's has essentially worked with the tribe pretty much her entire career, but even living with the on the tribe reservation for like 20 years. Um, so she had a very intimate knowledge. And, we connected after I finished college, and she mentioned that there was going to be a really interesting trip with about 100 Seminoles going up to Charleston, South Carolina to visit the grave of Osceola. And
Oh,
she had said to me, she said, I'm looking for a cameraman, and maybe you could help me with that. And then when I met with her and talked with her about it, I said, this is not just documenting this on camera. This is a whole program here, a whole documentary, because this was the first time ever since Osceola passed away in the mid 1800s that such a large contingent of Seminoles were going to visit his grave in mass. And it was a really special trip to be a part of that. And so we documented that. And basically, it was a road trip picking up Seminoles through all the reservations, starting with Hollywood and going up through Big Cypress and Brighton and Immokalee and Tampa and heading up to St. Augustine and then eventually to Charleston. So that film is essentially the story of Osceola, all against the backdrop of the Seminoles as they, were kind of revisiting his history. And
well,
that actually
can you?
was a project by the Seminole tribe. They funded that project, and that kind of started me with a relationship, with the tribe with that film.
A couple of questions about that film. So can you tell us a little bit about Osceola, and can you tell us a little bit about what the purpose was for the Seminoles to make that trip 100 years later, 100 more than 100?
Yeah, so Osceola was and he his name is obviously one of the most iconic names in Florida. He was a leader. Some people get it wrong. He wasn't a chief of the. A lot of people like to say, "Oh, he was a Chief Osceola," but he wasn't a formal chief. He was a leader, and with the Seminole Wars of the mid 1800s. He was one of the famous, iconic leaders. I think what was interesting about Osceola was, in a way, he was somehow more famous in the, let's call it, the Anglo community of the United States, the white community of, they would call it back then, of the United States, in the press and the media, because they would hear of things going on with the Seminole War, and they would hear of the successes of Osceola, and there were times when they were trying to sign treaties. The U.S. would sign treaties, and then they would betray the indigenous people. And there was a famous moment, and where they say Osceola, they put a treaty on the table, and Osceola took a big knife and put a knife in the middle of the treaty in disgust. And he was, when the Seminoles were fighting the U.S. Army, they were essentially using guerrilla tactics, and that the U.S. Army had a real hard time managing getting here in Florida. There were some Seminoles who, there was that during the campaign with Andrew Jackson. Obviously, there was a campaign to the Trail of Tears, and there was a campaign to try and remove all of the Indians, west to Oklahoma. And some Seminoles went to Oklahoma, and actually that's the reason you have the Seminole tribe of Oklahoma.
Right.
Some of them returned, but there was a I don't know whether it was a few hundred or what have you, but some Seminoles were able to evade capture and stayed in Florida, and that's why the Seminoles are called the Unconquered. So Osceola was actually within that conflict. He was brought to a treaty signing where they said they wanted to make peace with the Seminoles, and the U.S. Army betrayed him, and they took him captive. I'm kind of going through this very quickly, but they took him captive. They took him to the fort in St. Augustine, which at that time under the U.S. Army was called Fort Marion, and he was imprisoned there. And eventually he was taken up to Charleston, up to a fort called Fort Moultrie. And unfortunately, he passed away from disease up there. So he's buried in front of Fort Moultrie. Actually, if the documentary called Osceola's Journey is essentially based on the book by Dr. Patricia Whitman, which is called Osceola's Legacy. And there's a whole backstory there whereby Osceola was buried without his head. Um,
Oh,
a doctor named Whedon, who was in Charleston, at that time, it was a novelty to, when someone passed away, to take their head and put it in a jar, what have you, and store it away or what have you. Um, and apparently there was maybe a fire, but people don't know. But if you go to Osceola's grave, he's buried without his head.
mm,
And so, I think the this is a whole nother topic, but in terms of the way indigenous people deal with death, is it's something that they don't necessarily want to visit the dead. There's a certain sacredness to leaving the dead alone. Um, and we can talk about that later with one of my other documentaries. But so normally, like some people might say, well, Osceola's body is in Charleston. Why, the Seminoles, they're very powerful today. Why don't they bring Osceola back to Florida? And people have talked about that for many years. But the way indigenous people see that is, he was laid to rest in that place in Charleston. So and so they just want to leave it alone. But that journey was a journey, I think, to finally, to for the Seminoles to kind of revisit that history and to honor him by going back to visit his grave in Charleston. So that's what that story was about, and that was actually well, no, the Fort Lauderdale documentary and that documentary were my first documentaries to be on PBS locally. So that was one of the inroads to getting on broadcast television at that time, and to tell those stories. So
and since then you've worked also with PBS, correct? You've made projects that PBS has commissioned, is that right?
yes, so I yeah, I worked. I got back working with PBS on a kids show called Kids Stew with the author James Patterson. I got connected a director that I worked with for many years named Frank Costantini. I worked with him with an ad. He was with an ad agency in Jacksonville called On Ideas, which is still around. But at that time, I was still doing TV production, commercial production, and for instance, we did Winn-Dixie for about 10 years.
Uh-huh.
So that was one of our big clients. And actually, what most people don't realize about James Patterson is he comes from the advertising industry. He was previously the worldwide creative director for J. Walter Thompson Advertising in New York.
Wow.
So he oversaw the entire world of advertising for them. And Frank, the director who I've worked with for many years, he had worked with James back in those days in advertising, and Mr. Patterson wanted to do a kind of a kid show that centered around literacy, books, art, music, just basically a stew of various stories and sketches with kids, just to encourage literacy and to encourage reading. So he partnered with South Florida PBS, and they created we created the show Kids Stew, and did that for 3 seasons. And the show itself was geared more towards middle grade kids, so ages essentially like 8 to 12, which for me was like the most phenomenal age group to work with because they're fun, they're not teenagers yet.
Haven't got jaded.
They're a little bit snarky. Mr.
Uh,
Patterson, likes that snarkiness. He was famous for his own books like Middle School, The Worst Years of My Life, and and essentially, the show itself is kind of a mix between what I say Saturday Night Live and Discovery Channel, because it's educational but also entertaining at the same time. And and Joanna, my wife, also worked as a producer on the show. So we had a blast, and we basically produced that up till the pandemic, and then from then things kind of moved on. But it was a wonderful show. We won awards for it. and a lot of the kids from the show are having some great success on their own.
Oh,
Um,
that's interesting.
but yeah, but it was truly a blast to work on Kids Stew. So
The kids on the show who are having success, are they working as actors or
they're
what?
working,
What?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. A lot of them. Uh, one of the girls, Milena, was on the show Cobra Kai.
Uh,
Some of the kids, like Nicholas from our show, he's been in some movies. Um, there was a young girl, Samantha Lorraine, who just came out with the Dora the Explorer movie on Paramount. She was the lead in that movie.
wow.
And so the kids are doing great. One of the kids, Armando, who was on the show, actually he won an Emmy himself for the show. So he won an Emmy, basically as a 12-year-old, which
Wow.
is pretty incredible. But yeah,
Fantastic.
all those kids were super talented, and actually, it's interesting because when we were casting the show, we had a lot of pushback from people saying, "Well, you're going to have to go to California to find the talent in terms of the kids, all the Disney kids, all the Nickelodeon kids."
Right.
Um, and we thought, no, I think we have a great, acting community here between, Miami and Orlando. Um, and we were pleasantly surprised to find out that not only did we have kids who were great for the show, but they really knocked it out of the park. I mean, they were just super talented, and I mean, I think that was one of those things where the chemistry just worked. Everything just kind of came together. We had a great script writer, a guy named Brian Sitz, who also worked with Patterson back in New York, and his the scripts were just inventive and creative, and it's a lot of fun. And if you go to YouTube, you can go to Kids Stew on YouTube, and you can find all the segments from the shows. And what they are is just, actually it's kind of similar to the way Laugh-In worked, where you had short segments and you go from segment to segment, and that's kind of what we do. So, and that's again why it's called Kids Stew, because it's just a stew of content. And But we were able to work, and interview with very famous authors. I mean, we went down to Key West to meet Judy Blume and
Uh,
Carl Hyacin, Dave Barry, and I mean so many other wonderful writers that the kids got to interview themselves. So we always said it
oh,
was a show. It was a show for kids and by kids, and that's exactly what it was.
I thought it might be fun to play the trailer that you've given us for the
Sure.
next show you're working on with James Patterson.
Yeah.
So, Emily, over to you if you're ready with that.
Can we please talk about it? Let's take a moment to discuss. Let's take a moment to debrief. Let's take a moment to unpack. So I'm not really understanding why they're not telling y'all. Like, we all know that the world is behind, like, globally, like, because of the pandemic and stuff. But I don't understand why they're not stressing to y'all how bad it is. Like, I'm not even trying to be funny, but these kids are, I'm going to just say this. I teach 7th grade. They are still performing on the 4th grade level.
All over North America, reading skills have seen a steep decline. And no, it's not just the pandemic. And you can't blame the teachers either. It's the system.
It's time to stop talking about the literacy crisis in America. We all know there's a crisis. Kids everywhere are struggling to learn how to read, and despite the fact that we know more stuff about how reading works today than we've ever known in our country's history, reading scores are getting worse, not better, and no, it's not because of COVID.
Reading crisis in America is not new information, and the science of reading is not new information. In fact, it's over half a century old.
I said, "What's the last book you read?" And he said, "I haven't."
54% of U.S. adults are reading at or below 7th grade level.
20% of adults in the United States are illiterate. Over 50% of adults can't read past an 8th grade level, so it's not just the kids.
Ain't nobody talking about how they just keep moving, passing them on. They just keep passing them on, 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 passing them on. I can put as many zeros in this grade book as I want to. They gonna move that child to the 8th grade next year. Ain't nobody talking about that. Why they not talking about that? Why they not telling y'all that y'all... And why don't y'all know that y'all kids not performing on their grade level? Why y'all don't know this? Why y'all don't know?
The cot.
Now read the whole thing.
The cat can fit on the cot.
Kids are learning how to read in a whole new way. It's based on the science of reading. These fundamental skills are being implemented in schools around the world. The science of reading is setting the foundation for kids to have a better life.
The act of learning how to read is the most important thing that a child in elementary school does. And it's the most important mission of every elementary school, is to ensure that every child leaves a skilled reader. And it's something that we've certainly failed spectacularly at achieving, that idea that every child is leaving our elementary schools proficient in reading. They're not.
What's this word?
We have 2/3 of children not reaching the proficient level, which is a horrifying statistic to me.
Wonderful, wonderful. So kids
That,
do.
by the way, that's probably the just so if your viewers want to know, that's probably the first time that's been broadcast out there, that trailer, because it's brand new.
Woo!
So
The news broke here.
yeah.
So Kids Stew was in the past, was up until COVID. What is this new project you're working on with James Patterson?
So the Reading Reboot. So obviously James Patterson is a prolific author, and you know, he has always been a huge advocate for literacy and getting more people reading, not just kids, everybody, adults. You know, and so he has been a big advocate for helping kids learn how to read. One of the things that it's kind of been this silent truth that people just, and that's why they talk at the beginning of the film, people just aren't talking about the fact that reading scores have not gone up in over 20 years. And we essentially, most schools, like here in Florida, for instance, reading proficiency is only around 65% or so, which is awful when you think about that. Here in the United States, you would think literacy would be a priority. As a matter of fact, where Joanna, my wife, is from, Costa Rica, they have a 95% literacy rate. And here in the U.S., we essentially have a 60-some% rate. So it's been important to bring those rates up. So I think Joanne left us, everybody. We'll see if she comes back.
I think she's coming back. She froze. She just messaged me.
That's all right.
Technology.
But I'll keep talking. And essentially, there has been this practice that's been kind of brewing over the last 10 years or so, essentially called the science of reading, which is various disciplines coming together to help kids learn how to read. So, you there, Joanne?
I'm here. My Wi-Fi just kicked me out, so I'm on my phone now.
Okay. Well, I was still talking. I kept
Yes,
going.
I heard everything. I heard.
Oh,
everything.
okay, good. Yeah. So essentially, the way reading has been taught to children, put it in simple terms, was simply. I'm getting in trouble for this, but it was essentially a process of memorization, using cueing, using clues. So, for instance, if you wanted to teach kids the word December, you would show a scene of winter and say, "What month is this?" And they say December. And what the science of reading does, amongst other things, is focus on the essential phonemes of words and phonics. So they're going back to teaching children how to decode a word and read out the word. So if you're teaching the word December, now what they do is they're focused on teaching the kids to read the word as December and to break down the word into its components. Because essentially we want kids to learn how to read words properly rather than just memorizing words. And there's more to it than that, but essentially only now, and it's pretty incredible, since the pandemic, have schools started to implement this type of curriculum, because there's a whole backstory behind how this happened, and I don't mind plugging. There was a wonderful radio documentary podcast series called Sold a Story, where they talk about essentially the education publishing industry was kind of keeping back this better way of teaching kids how to read. And so Mr. Patterson wanted to emphasize a program. He's actually worked in tandem with the University of Florida Literacy Institute, where at the University of Florida they have a great education program where they teach educators in college how to teach certain things. And so there was this renewed focus on how to teach reading, and a wonderful lady named Dr. Holly Lane, who was the director of the program. She's been working on this for like the past 20 years, but only now is it starting to come into classrooms with curriculum, real curriculum in various schools. But not all schools have this. Some are still teaching, some traditional methodologies. But essentially, the way reading has been taught has been the same since like the 1940s and 50s.
Wow.
And so now they're really starting to understand it. So one of the things we did in this documentary was we went into various schools, and some of the schools are in poor neighborhoods. Like there was one school in Tallahassee with a wonderful staff named Riley Elementary. But with this program, just in about half a year, they went from 15% proficiency to 69%.
Wow.
Just by using this curriculum.
Wow.
So we're excited to get this film. This film will probably be, going to PBS. The idea is to really get the message out there that this is working, and, parents need to know about this. And I'm a father of 3 daughters, and I kind of started to question, well, wait a second. I remember when they were learning how to read, they were just doing the old cueing style, and maybe they could have been better, more proficient readers by, utilizing a curriculum like this. So it's really kind of, as it's called the Reading Reboot. So it's kind of rebooting the whole reading system. And we want to, get it out there for as many people to watch as possible.
How fantastic. I had no idea about this. I'm so excited to know that there's an up-leveling of teaching reading, the science of reading, because there's I don't know, I didn't grow up in America, but the way that reading and writing are taught here seemed very off to me. They always seemed very off. And I was an English teacher for a long time, And I have this thing, I was just talking about this the other day, that I think all Americans have been tortured by their high school English teachers, and they're still in recovery from that.
We need them. So, and thank you for that. Thank you for, giving that back. So.
Yeah, and so I just think there's just something off, and there's got to be a better way of doing it. And we were not taught that way in England. That was not how we were taught to read. And it's been turned into, to me, it's the equivalent of the way we were taught, that I was taught Latin and Greek and Spanish, foreign languages, the way Americans are taught English. So it doesn't make any sense to me. So that's really exciting to hear about that. And I completely have run out of time before I actually asked if anybody had any questions. This has been so interesting, Scott. Does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask before we close up? I think not. But this has been fabulous. And it's so funny because I saw Leaving Overtown the other day, and I thought we were going to talk a lot about that. We talked about all the other films.
Yeah. Actually, you were talking about the Everglades. One of the other films I did was Women of the Watershed with my daughter, Chloe, and talking about canoeing. We actually transversed the entire Everglades from Florida Bay up to Orlando. So and that was I just wanted to mention that because that was really a fun project we worked on. As kind of as a family, but it's done very well. It's playing nationally on PBS, and we won an Emmy Award for that one as well. So we're excited about that. And it's just you know, just always exciting to work on various films. Like I said, I'm just kind of a student that it's always about learning about new subject matters, and you know, so that's really, you know, what drives me and propels me forward.
And I hope that people watching this go to your website because, you know, I came back to Florida about 3 years ago, and I love Florida particularly because of the natural environment here and because of the history. You know, I would love to be involved in making a film about Smallwoods and that history over there being
Yeah.
the last place in America without law. I think
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Peter
No,
Mattheson book, and
I
yeah,
read the book. Yeah. No,
yeah,
I love that story.
yes, and I love Florida history, and there's a lot of people who don't think Florida has any history, but there's Florida history, and the Florida environment are very, very special. So thank
Right.
you for all your work,
Absolutely.
and yeah, very, very exciting. So Scott, thank you so much for your time. We'll have to stay in touch.
Absolutely.
Say hi to Joanna for me, and thank you again. Thank you for coming and inspiring filmmakers
Oh,
to.
thank you, and I thanks everybody for being on here on the Zoom.
Thank you. Bye
All
bye.
right.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. All right.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.